The device hummed in the darkness beneath Wayne Manor components, scavenged from a dozen black market deals and 3 dead civilizations. Lex Luthor's fingers moved across the interface, calibrating frequencies that shouldn't exist. The mother box fragment pulsed against its housing, protesting containment. Speed Force energy coiled through conduits designed by desperate men with nothing left to lose. Batman stood 3 feet back, cowl shadowing eyes that hadn't seen sleep in 40 hours. The regime's latest purge had claimed 16 insurgency safehouses in 72 hours. This wasn't strategy anymore. This was extinction mathematics. Stable sim, Lex said, not looking up. The Prime Universe signature is holding. We pull their Justice League through. We have leverage. Superman can't kill without proving us right. Or we destabilize both realities and accomplish his work for him. Then we were dead, anyway. At least this way we choose how. The mother box flared. The Speed Force conduit screamed with light that had no business existing in 3 dimensions. Energy tore through the Batcave in waves that made stone groan and equipment spark. Batman's hand went to the containment abort, then stopped. Too late. The threshold was opening. Lex's screen filled with interference. Wait, there's something... His voice sharpened. Pulse signature from outside the target zone. Something's riding the beam. Shut it down. Can't. It's already through the aperture. The gateway erupted. Not the clean opening they'd calculated. This was violation. Reality buckled inward, then snapped back with a sound like continental plates grinding. The air itself developed teeth. He came through like ordnance. No Justice League. No allies from a cleaner world. Just one figure in armor that drank light and gave back nothing. The solar feeding suit blazed with stored yellow sun radiation panels across chest and shoulders, pulsing with power that turned the cave's shadows into cowering things. The symbol on his chest was wrong. The S sat there like an accusation too large, too aggressive, belonging to something that had stopped asking permission. Superboy Prime hit the cave floor, and the impact spread in concentric fractures. He didn't stumble. Didn't orient himself. He turned his head with the deliberate calm of something that had never needed to check its surroundings, because nothing here could threaten it. His gaze found the monitors, found the feeds Lex had been using to track Prime Universe signatures, found the crystallized moment of Year One playing on repeat Superman's fist through the Joker's chest the exact second Metropolis stopped being a city and became a grave. You pulled me into this. Not a question. Prime's voice carried the flat certainty of someone who'd stopped needing confirmation years ago. You opened a door to the world that should have been, and you dragged me into the mistake instead. Batman's hand moved toward his belt. Prime's eyes tracked the motion without concern. Don't bother. Prime stepped forward. The cave floor protested beneath armored boots. He stopped 2 yards away, close enough that the heat radiating from his suit made the air shimmer. You all think you can control what you don't understand. Lex was already backing toward the secondary exit, fingers dancing across a wrist-mounted device. The power readings are Batman. This isn't Kryptonian standard. This is something else. Prime ignored him. His attention stayed fixed on the monitors showing Superman's regime propaganda. Banners declaring order through strength. Footage of the Hall of Justice repurposed into a command center for planetary subjugation. The face of a Superman who decided mercy was weakness, and weakness was unforgivable. He wears the symbol wrong, Prime said. He breathes wrong. He exists wrong. The temperature in the cave was climbing. The solar panels on his armor were bleeding heat into the surrounding airstone, beginning to crack from thermal stress. This whole world is a mistake someone published and called truth. Batman's voice stayed level. You're not from the Prime Universe we were targeting. No. Prime turned fully toward him, and for the first time, something like satisfaction crossed his features. I'm from the universe your device should never have touched. The one outside your framework. The one that makes every other version look like a rough draft. He raised one hand. Not threatening, just existing in space, fingers slightly curled. And I'm going to fix it. The punch came without warning. Not at Batman. Not at Lex. At the air itself. Prime's fist drove forward into nothing and hit everything. The force didn't dissipate. It spread. Reality rippled outward from the impact point, visible distortion that moved through matter like sonar through water. The Batcave's stone walls developed hairline fractures that branched and multiplied. Equipment sparked. The mother box fragments shrieked and went dark. Above ground, across Gotham, across the continent, the effect propagated. Television screens flickered, showing Metropolis broadcasts overlaid with images that shouldn't exist. Glimpses of a city that had never burned a Superman, who'd never killed a world that ran on different rules. The regime's communication network stuttered. Their carefully maintained propaganda feeds, jumbled with contradictory data. Emergency alerts triggering across every monitoring station. In the cave, Batman watched the monitors fracture and reform, watched reality itself try to process what had just been forced into it. The readouts made no sense. Energy signatures that violated baseline physics. Space-time metrics fluctuating between stable and catastrophic. Prime lowered his fist. The ripples were still spreading, still tearing through the world's underlying structure like cracks in overstressed ice. He looked at the damage with something close to approval. "That's one," he said. "That's one," he said. "Now everyone knows something's wrong. Now your whole broken world knows there's something it can't contain." The alarm started. Every emergency frequency the regime monitored lit up simultaneously. Reports of seismic activity that wasn't seismic. Structural failures in buildings that had been standing for centuries. And everywhere that same visual distortion reality, glitching like corrupted footage showing two timelines trying to occupy the same space. Lex was staring at his readings, face gone pale. He punched through dimensional barriers. He punched through them. "That's not possible. Shouldn't exist," Prime said, almost to himself. "Just like this place. Just like your Superman. Just like everything here." He started walking toward the cave exit, armored boots leaving scorch marks on stone. "But I do. And that's the problem you're all going to learn about." Batman didn't move to stop him. The tactical analysis was already complete. Everything in his arsenal was designed to contain restrain redirect. Everything assumed physics worked normally. Everything assumed limits. Prime reached the cave entrance and stopped looking back once. "Tell Superman the real symbol's here." The heat around him intensified, air wavering like mirage shimmer. "Tell him retcons don't survive the original." Then he was gone, launching upward through the cave mouth in a column of displaced air and superheated atmosphere. The sound barrier didn't so much break as surrender. Batman moved to the main console. The damage assessments were already flooding in. Structural compromises across 3 continents. Communication disruptions. And that ripple effect still spreading, still forcing reality to acknowledge something had changed. Lex stood frozen, staring at the space where Prime had been. "We didn't pull him through. He hijacked the connection. He used our device as an anchor to force his way into a universe that doesn't want him." "No." Batman's fingers moved across the keyboard, pulling up regime alert frequencies. "A universe that can't reject him. He's too far outside the rules." The first regime broadcasts were already starting. Unknown entity. Threat level undetermined. Containment protocols active. High above Gotham, Prime was a burning point against the night sky trajectory locked on Metropolis. On the capital of Superman's new order, on the heart of everything this world had become. The monitor at Batman's elbow showed the final reading from the mother box before it died. A simple message in new God script. Warning: paradox anchored. Timeline integrity compromised. Batman reached for the secure comm that connected to what remained of the insurgency network. They needed to evacuate civilians from Metropolis, needed to clear blast zones, needed to prepare for what came when an unstoppable force met an immovable tyrant. But he knew, watching that burning point cross the sky, that preparation was already meaningless. This wasn't something you prepared for. This was something you survived. If survival was still an option, the regime's alert sirens began to wail across the planet. Martial law protocols activating. Superman's voice cutting through every broadcast frequency with that familiar combination of authority and absolute certainty. All units respond. Unknown threat inbound to Metropolis. Lethal force authorized. In the Batcave, surrounded by sparking equipment and fractured stone, Batman looked at the monitors showing Prime's approach vector and did something he hadn't done in years. He prayed this ended quickly, because if it didn't, there wouldn't be a world left to save. Bro, Chapter 1 is super fun because Batman and Lex fuck up immediately. Like instantly. These idiots really tried to summon a hero, and instead they got Superboy Prime, which is basically the universe's worst mistake showing up uninvited. Well, Prime pops in, looks around at this edgy injustice world, and you can feel him thinking, yeah, this timeline is trash. He's not even fighting yet, he's just mad. Dude starts punching the air, and reality starts bugging out like a broken game. That alone tells you everyone's screwed. Okay, now, Superman's out here trying to do the usual hero stuff, rules and morals and all that. But Prime does not give a single shit. He's acting like a salty gamer who hacked the server and is now griefing everyone for fun. And you wonder about Batman Man's cooked. You know it's bad when Batman runs out of plans. At that point, he's basically standing there like, welp, we're fucked. This is what happens when you try to fix a timeline with science and accidentally summon the angriest dude alive who hates everything about it and is fully ready to burn it all down just because he doesn't like the story. Metropolis had learned to interpret sirens by frequency. The low drone meant curfew. The sharp pulse meant insurgent activity. The steady wail that cut through the city now meant something the regime classified as existential. Superman descended on Hall of Justice airspace with Wonder Woman 3 seconds behind him. Below the plaza had already been cleared by Yellow Lantern constructs barriers, channeling pedestrians away from the impact zone, where Prime had landed. Concrete showed stress fractures radiating from a single point. The kinetic signature matched nothing in their database. Threat assessment. Superman said, voice carrying through the command frequency. The response came from a regime analyst, words clipped with professional terror. Unable to classify. Entity registers Kryptonian biomarkers, but power output exceeds baseline by a factor of, sir, the readings don't make sense. Make them make sense. We can't. This is outside. Then contain it. Prime stood in the center of the plaza armor, still radiating heat from atmospheric entry. He hadn't moved since touchdown, hadn't looked around. Just stood there waiting while the city's emergency protocols screamed and scrambled around him like insects trying to process an earthquake. When he saw Superman, something shifted in his posture. Not recognition. Confirmation. You came fast, Prime said. Like you own the sky. Superman touched down 20 meters away, cape settling behind him in calculated display. Diana flanked right shield up, eyes tracking Prime's hands. Yellow Lantern constructs tightened their perimeter. 3 sniper teams had already locked targeting lasers on the intruder's skull. This was containment doctrine. This was how the regime handled anomalies. Show overwhelming force, offer one chance to comply, then escalate to whatever level proved necessary. You're in violation of Metropolis airspace and emergency protocols, Superman said. The words came out flat, rehearsed the kind of statement designed for later broadcast. Stand down. Submit to. Prime moved, not an attack, just a step forward. One armored boot striking pavement, the sound like a hammer on bedrock. The Yellow Lantern barriers flickered, cracked. The constructs weren't breaking from impact. They were breaking from proximity to something they couldn't hold. "I'm not here for your laws," Prime said. "I'm here because you're wearing that symbol wrong." Diana's voice cut through the command frequency. "Multiple hostiles incoming, wait. No, just him, just one." Prime's fist came up fast, heat vision already burning through the air where Superman had been standing. Clark, twisted aside, felt the beam sear past close enough to char his cape. The precision was wrong. This wasn't testing range. This was execution attempt 1. Superman returned fire, his own heat vision converging with Prime's mid-air. The beams met and detonated, thermal expansion shattering windows across 6 blocks. The shockwave threw civilians who hadn't evacuated fast enough. Regime soldiers went down. Camera drones sparked and fell. Through the blast wash, Prime walked forward, not flying, walking. Like physics was a suggestion he'd decided to ignore. Clark hit him at supersonic velocity, shoulder check designed to move mountains. Prime's boots scraped backward 1/2 meter. That was all. He caught Superman's follow-up punch in one hand, twisted, and threw him through the Hall of Justice Memorial Wall. The structure was reinforced concrete rated for tank rounds. Superman's impact cratered it rebar, screaming, as stress points failed. Before he could extract himself, Prime was there, hands closing on his chest. Armor lifting, slamming him down into pavement, hard enough to create a depression 3 meters wide. "This is the part where you're supposed to be strong," Prime said. His face was close now, close enough that Superman could see his eyes. No madness there, no rage, just cold assessment of a failed product. "You're supposed to be the one who doesn't break." Clark brought his knee up, drove it into Prime's ribs with force that would have shattered battleship plating. Prime didn't even grunt, just held him there pinned while Metropolis watched through every emergency broadcast camera still functioning. Diana hit Prime from behind shield first, the impact releasing energy that made nearby cars flip. Prime staggered forward 1 step, turned his head to look at her over his shoulder. "You're the one who broke him," he said. Then he spun, still holding Superman with one hand, and used him as a weapon to bat Diana out of the air. She crashed into a regime monument, a 50-foot statue of Superman breaking chains, the ultimate symbol of liberation through strength. The irony of her collision point wouldn't be lost on anyone watching the footage later. Prime dropped Superman and stepped back, giving him room to stand, a courtesy or a judgment. Clark rose, blood at the corner of his mouth. First blood. His blood? On camera, in Metropolis, in front of the world that needed to believe he was unchallengeable. "Lethal force authorized," he said into the command channel. "All units." The yellow lanterns responded. First constructs manifesting as spears, nets, cage bars, anything to pin Prime in place. He walked through them like they were stage props. His hand swept out almost casual, and constructs that should have held against planetary siege shattered into light fragments. Superman came at him again this time. No restraint, no calculated display, just speed and strength refined through years of fighting things that could hurt him. He drove Prime backward through a building, then another, each impact releasing megajoules of kinetic energy. Glass, steel, concrete, everything became shrapnel. Prime caught himself in midair, stopped the backward momentum through nothing but will, and drove his forehead into Superman's face. The sound carried across the city like a bomb. They fell together, still grappling, and hit the street in a tangle of limbs and unleashed power. The pavement simply ceased to exist for 20 meters in every direction. Underground infrastructure ruptured. Power conduits exploded. Water mains geysered. Clark broke the grapple, put distance between them, wiped blood from his nose. Across from him, Prime stood in the crater they'd created armor, showing not even a scratch. "You're holding back," Prime said. "Worried about the audience, about showing them what you really are." "I know what I am." "No. You know what you've convinced yourself you need to be." Prime's heat vision flared again, twin beams that forced Superman to dodge to move to surrender ground. You took the symbol and made it mean fear. You saw the worst day of your life and decided that justified everything after. Clark's return fire came faster, hotter, sustained. Prime walked through it, armor absorbing what would have melted tank battalions. "You don't get to judge me," Superman said. "You don't know what I've lost. I know what you've become." The punch that followed drove Superman down to one knee. Not because it was stronger than he could resist, because Prime hit him in the exact spot where his ribs had fractured during the Doomsday fight, the injury that had never quite healed, right, the weakness no one was supposed to know about. Prime did his research. Or he simply knew the way. Original drafts always knew what the revisions tried to hide. Diana was back in the fight sword drawn now, going for joints in Prime's armor. He caught the blade between two fingers, held it there, while she strained against strength that wouldn't yield. Then he flicked it aside, grabbed her by the throat, and threw her toward the regime broadcast tower 3 blocks away. She hit hard enough to crack the structure's foundation. Hard enough that she wouldn't be standing for several minutes. Superman used the distraction, came in low, grabbed Prime around the waist, and shot upward at maximum velocity. The altitude change was instant, brutal, meant to starve Kryptonian powers of yellow sun radiation. They broke through cloud cover, then stratosphere, Clark pushing higher, higher, trying to force Prime into a power deficit. Prime laughed, actually laughed. His armor's solar panels were glowing bright enough to hurt mortal eyes. Not depleting, charging. He'd prepared for this exact tactic because of course he had. Because he'd seen every version of Superman try the same desperate move. "Altitude won't save you," Prime said. "Geography won't save you. Nothing saves you from being wrong." He broke Superman's grip, grabbed him by the cape, and hurled him back toward Metropolis. The velocity was surgical, precise. Superman hit the plaza in front of Hall of Justice, exactly where he'd first landed. Exactly where every camera in the city could capture the crater his impact formed. Prime descended slowly, giving the moment weight, giving everyone watching time to process what they were seeing. The untouchable tyrant face down in rubble, struggling to rise, while his armor sparked and his breath came ragged. The broadcast wasn't interrupted. No one cut the feed. The regime's own infrastructure was forcing them to watch their leader broken in the street. Prime landed beside Superman, crouched down close enough to speak without shouting. "This is what you wanted, isn't it?" His voice was quiet now, almost intimate. Total control. Total authority. Everyone either with you or broken by you. He reached out, grabbed Superman's jaw, forced his head up toward the nearest camera. But you can't break what came before the mistake. You can't control the standard you're failing to meet. Clark tried to speak. Blood made the words thick. "You don't understand. I understand you're a rough draft that forgot it wasn't the final copy." Prime released him, stood, looked directly into the broadcast cameras. "Your Superman is not Superman. He's what happens when power meets weakness and calls it strength." He turned and walked away. Not flying. Walking. Through the destroyed plaza, past the shattered monuments, through the city that had learned to fear its protector. No one stopped him. Diana was down. The lanterns were gone, their constructs dust. Superman lay in the crater, watched by a world that had just learned he could bleed, could fall, could be made small by something he couldn't intimidate or destroy. In the Batcave, watching through hacked feeds, Bruce Wayne stared at the screens, with the particular horror of a man watching his worst predictions come true ahead of schedule. This wasn't victory over tyranny. This was chaos meeting control, and proving control was always temporary. The regime's authority was bleeding out through every broadcast. The insurgency hadn't struck this blow, which meant they couldn't capitalize on it. And Prime was walking away like the fight had been beneath his notice, which it had. The martial law siren started up again, different frequency now. Not threat response, damage control. Every regime asset mobilizing to spin this to contain the narrative, to convince the population that what they'd just witnessed wasn't the beginning of the end. But Batman knew better. He'd seen empires fall. He'd seen authority collapse when the illusion of invincibility shattered. Superman's regime survived on the promise that resistance was futile, that no force on Earth could challenge the new order. Superboy Prime had just proved that promise false, and he'd done it without even trying. Oh gosh. Like Chapter 2 is straight disrespect from start to finish. Superman rolls up with the whole regime like he's about to scare somebody, cape-flowing voice all deep and serious. And Prime just does not care. Dude walks right past him and basically says, "You wear the symbol wrong," which is the Kryptonian version of calling your whole existence mid. That alone is crazy. And you can tell Prime knows Clark inside out. Every punch Superman throws, Prime already saw it coming. It's like he read the walkthrough and Clark's just button mashing. Then Diana jumps in thinking she's gonna help, and Prime straight up grabs Superman and uses him to smack her out of the air. Not a combo, not a move, just straight humiliation. Superman panics and tries the space play, like, okay, let's take this off Earth, and Prime just laughs because he showed up with a solar suit. Congrats, bro. You just gave him a free ride to charge up. 2 seconds later, Clark is getting slammed back into the ground like a dropped phone. The wildest part is Prime talking shit the whole time. He called him a rough draft while beating his ass. That's not even fighting anymore, that's bullying with commentary. By the end of it, the whole regime looks fake as hell because their power is built on fear, and Prime looked at them and saw nothing but cosplay heroes in a badly written timeline. The emergency session convened in Hall of Justice sub-level 7 blast doors, sealed quantum encryption active. Superman stood at the head of the tactical table, cape removed, uniform showing scorch marks from the plaza. Wonder Woman sat with ice packs pressed against fractured ribs. The Yellow Lanterns formed a perimeter outside their fear constructs, reinforced after Prime had walked through the previous iterations like tissue paper. Lex Luthor appeared via hologram broadcasting from a secure location Batman had provided. His expression carried the particular weariness of a man being proven catastrophically correct. "The entity designates itself Superboy Prime," Lex said, pulling up biometric data across multiple screens. "Kryptonian physiology augmented by what my scans indicate is a solar absorption suit. It's feeding him continuous yellow sun radiation, independent of environmental conditions." "Then we remove the environment," Superman said. "Red sun protocols, global coverage." "Already considered? Already insufficient?" Lex gestured, bringing up schematics. His suit counters deprivation. It's not drawing from our sun, it's drawing from stored reserves that register as effectively infinite. You'd need to maintain red sun coverage for years to drain him. Diana shifted the ice pack jaw tight. "Then we don't drain him. We cage him." "With what?" Batman's voice came through the secure channel deliberately flat. "Lantern constructs failed. Kryptonian restraints failed. He walked through a building and the building lost. Because we haven't committed sufficient resources." Superman's hands pressed against the table fingers, leaving stress marks in reinforced polymer. "Activate the Phantom Zone projector. We don't need to beat him. We need him gone." The silence that followed carried weight. Lex broke it. "The projector requires 30 seconds of immobilization. Target must remain stationary for the dimensional anchor to lock. Based on observed behavior, Prime won't give you 3 seconds. Then we make him stationary." Superman looked at Diana. "Full regime deployment, every asset. We hit him with everything simultaneously until something holds long enough." Batman's channel stayed quiet for 5 seconds longer than tactical necessity required. When he spoke, the words came careful. "And when that fails, we've committed every resource to a strategy that proves we have nothing left. It won't fail. It already has. You engaged him with lethal force authorization. He walked away. That wasn't tactical retreat. That was dismissal. Superman's eyes flared, red heat building behind the irises. The holographic display flickered from electromagnetic interference. Then what do you suggest, surrender? Evacuation. Damage mitigation. Stop trying to contain what can't be. I didn't build this world by accepting what can't be done. The channel cut. Superman turned to the regime officers assembled in the room's periphery. Red Sun Satellite Network. Activate full deployment over Metropolis. Route all available power to maintain coverage. If his suit has reserves, we force him to burn through them. Orders dispersed through the command structure with mechanical efficiency. Within 90 seconds, orbital assets began repositioning. The sky above Metropolis shifted subtle at first, then unmistakable. Yellow sun radiation damped. The light turned copper, then crimson. Citizens who'd survived year one knew that color. Knew what it meant when the sky bled red. The panic started before the official broadcasts could control the narrative. Prime was 3 blocks from the plaza when the red sun coverage activated. He stopped walking, looked up at the altered sky, and something almost like amusement crossed his features. The solar panels on his armor began glowing brighter, not dimming, not struggling against deprivation, compensating. The suit had been designed by someone who understood Kryptonian weaknesses better than the Kryptonians themselves. Every contingency anticipated. Every countermeasure already accounted for. Prime took another step forward. The pavement beneath his boot didn't crack. It liquefied from radiant heat. Regime sensors registered the output spike and triggered secondary containment. Gravity wells activated from emitters installed after the Doomsday Protocol updates. Localized warping meant to multiply effective mass by factors of 10,000. Technology developed to pin gods to Earth. Prime slowed. For exactly 1 second, his momentum decreased his next step, requiring measurable effort. Then, the gravity wells started failing. Not from overload, from something deeper. The spatial warping couldn't maintain coherence around him, like reality itself was rejecting the attempt to bind what didn't belong. He kept walking. Force barriers snapped up across the street grid. Hard light constructs designed by Apocalypse engineers tested against dark side level threats. They formed a cube around Prime walls, 5 meters thick energy output, sufficient to contain a small sun. Prime put his hand against the nearest barrier. The surface rippled, destabilized. The hard light photons couldn't decide whether they were particles or waves of the quantum uncertainty spiking beyond recoverable thresholds. The barrier didn't shatter. It simply stopped being a barrier, the distinction between containment and open air becoming meaningless. Prime stepped through the gap he'd created by touching it. Batman watched from 6 different camera feeds simultaneously, each showing the same conclusion from different angles. The red sun coverage was draining city power reserves. The gravity wells had consumed 3 backup generators. The force barriers were offline. Every system deployed, every system bypassed. He opened a channel to the nearest insurgency safe house. Begin civilian evacuation. Metro sectors 4 through 9. Move them underground, move them out. I don't care where, just away from the engagement zone. The response came uncertain. We're the insurgency. We don't take orders from, you want to fight the regime, stay where you are. You want to save lives today, move. He cut the channel and opened another. This one routed through encryption so dense it took 5 seconds to establish connection. When Lex's hologram materialized, the scientist looked decades older than he had an hour ago. The numbers don't work, Lex said without preamble. Every simulation I run ends the same way. We can't stop him. We can't contain him. We can barely slow him down. Then we stop trying to win and start trying to minimize casualties. Superman won't accept that. Superman doesn't have a choice. Batman's fingers moved across the keyboard, pulling up infrastructure schematics. Regime authority is breaking. Every failed containment proves the central lie that they're in control. Prime doesn't need to destroy the system. He just needs to keep existing while it destroys itself, trying to hold him. Lex was quiet for a moment. You're saying we let him do whatever he's here to do. I'm saying we recognize what we're dealing with. This isn't an invasion. This isn't conquest. Prime called this world a mistake. He's here to prove it. The hologram flickered. And if he's right? Batman didn't answer. The question didn't need one. 3 blocks away, Prime reached the red sun emitter station. It was hardened against attack, buried beneath 30 meters of reinforced concrete protected by automated defense systems and yellow lantern patrols. Prime knelt and punched the street. The shockwave propagated downward through asphalt, through concrete, through the geological strata itself. The emitter station's foundation cracked. Support pillars buckled. The entire installation shifted 3 degrees off true. Warning klaxons screamed. Engineers abandoned posts. The red sun coverage flickered, failed, died. Normal daylight returned to Metropolis. Yellow sun radiation flooded back in. Prime stood brushed dust from his armor and continued walking. No destination, no obvious objective. Just forward movement steady and inevitable, while the world's most sophisticated containment infrastructure crumbled in his wake. In the command center, Superman watched the feeds, watched his protocols fail one by one, watched the entity that shouldn't exist simply refuse to be controlled. Diana's voice came quiet. Clark, we need to reconsider approach. No. His jaw set the muscle jumping beneath skin. Activate the Phantom Zone projector. I don't care if we don't have immobilization. Fire it anyway. Sir, without lock the projector will... I said fire it. The weapon had been held in reserve, the ultimate solution for threats that couldn't be killed, designed to shunt entire beings into dimensional exile. They'd used it on Doomsday, on Mongul, on threats that made conventional warfare meaningless. The projector powered up energy signature detectable from orbit. Prime stopped walking, turned toward the source, and waited. The beam lanced out dimensional breach energy meant to tear holes between worlds. It struck Prime dead center, wrapped around him, in cascading waves of spatial distortion. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then Prime took a step forward, then another, walking through dimensional exile the same way he'd walked through everything else. The projector overloaded. Reactor housing ruptured. The entire facility went dark. In the command center, someone was screaming damage reports. Diana was on her feet, despite fractured ribs staring at the feeds, with expression caught between shock and something approaching understanding. Superman's hands gripped the table edge hard enough that polymer cracked. Batman's voice cut through the chaos, cold and certain. It's over. He can't be contained. Stop trying before there's no city left to save. It's not over until... It was over before it started. We brought something into this world that doesn't acknowledge our rules. The Phantom Zone doesn't work because he's already outside every framework we used to build it. The feed showed Prime still walking trajectory unchanged while Metropolis burned power and infrastructure trying to make him stop. Superman cut the connection, turned to his officers. Martial law total implementation. Lock down every sector. I want him tracked, monitored. And when he shows weakness, because everything shows weakness, eventually I want every weapon we have ready to... He won't show weakness. Wonder Woman's voice was barely above whisper. Because he's not fighting us. He's just existing. And we're destroying ourselves trying to prove he shouldn't. Clark looked at her, at the doubt creeping into her expression, at the first crack in the absolute certainty that had held the regime together. Then we escalate until existence isn't enough. Outside, Prime had stopped walking. He stood in the middle of a street surrounded by debris from failed containment and looked up at the Hall of Justice Tower. At the symbol of authority rendered meaningless by his presence, he smiled. Not cruelty, not triumph. Just acknowledgement of a pattern completing itself exactly as predicted. Then he turned south, toward the coastline, toward the trench, toward the next system he would walk through on his way to proving this world wrong. Yeah, this is way funnier when you think about it. They watched Prime punch reality and still went okay. But what if we turn the lights off? Superman hits the red sun switch like he solved it, and Prime just turns his suit brighter and keeps walking. After that, physics is clearly scared of him. Gravity doesn't work. Force fields. No. The machines don't break from damage, they just give up, like this isn't in the manual, guys. Superman using the Phantom Zone projector is the wild part. That's the ultimate delete button. Prime walks through it like light fog. That's when you know you can't trap someone who already knows the story. Batman realizing the only move left is to run is perfect. They're not fighting a villain. They're fighting the guy editing the timeline. And the regime is wrecking their own city while Prime is just casually walking by. That's a clean L, everyone. The trench sat 40 meters below sea level, built into bedrock that had survived 3 tectonic shifts and 2 nuclear tests. 7 layers of security, each redundant, each designed by paranoid geniuses who'd assumed the last layer would fail. Biometric locks, quantum encryption, pressure-sensitive floors that could trigger nerve gas in under 2 seconds. The holding cells used technology scavenged from apocalypse barriers that had once caged new gods. It wasn't a prison. It was a statement. A declaration that some threats couldn't be reformed, couldn't be trusted to normal law, could only be buried so deep the world forgot they existed. 347 inmates. Political dissidents who'd spoken against the regime. Meta-humans who'd refused conscription. Villains too dangerous to kill, but too valuable to waste. All of them breathing recycled air, watching guards who never showed faces, counting days that blurred into years. Metamorpho ran security from a reinforced booth that could survive direct nuclear strike. His elemental composition made him ideal for the role, immune to most attacks, able to adapt to any escape attempt, loyal to the regime, because loyalty was the only thing keeping his son safe in a world that had learned to weaponize family. The alarms started at 1347 hours, not breach alarms. Seismic. Something was approaching through solid Earth trajectory locked on the facility's central axis. The sensors couldn't classify it. Couldn't determine if it was drill missile or something the threat database had no category for. Metamorpho switched to manual override, activated emergency lockdown. Every cell door received triple redundancy. Every corridor sealed. Guard stations went to combat alert. If something wanted in, it would have to punch through 7 layers, while the facility's automated defenses turned the approach vector into a kill zone. The first layer lasted 4 seconds. Prime didn't drill, didn't tunnel. He just walked through bedrock like it was disagreeing with his presence and losing the argument. The stone didn't shatter. It moved aside, molecular bonds rearranging themselves to avoid contact with something that operated on incompatible physics. He emerged in corridor Delta 7, armor dusty but undamaged. Emergency lighting painted him in red strobes. Automated turrets swiveled acquired target opened fire with rounds designed to penetrate Kryptonian hide. Prime walked through the barrage. Bullets impacted his chest and stopped existing as kinetic energy, the momentum simply disappearing into whatever space his armor occupied. The turrets emptied their magazines, reloaded, fired again. Same result. He reached the first security door, 6 inches of metamaterial composite, locked by systems that required 3 separate authorizations and a blood sacrifice from the Oversight Committee. Prime pushed it with one hand. The door didn't buckle, didn't bend. It just stopped being an obstacle. The distinction between open and closed becoming irrelevant to something that didn't acknowledge barriers. Behind him, the turrets clicked empty and silent. Metamorpho's voice echoed through the facility-wide intercom. All personnel evacuate. This is not a drill. Abandon posts and fall back to surface exits. Guards ran. Training said hold position, but training didn't account for watching security measures fail before they could activate. The evacuation protocols moved 300 staff toward the exits in controlled panic, leaving the inmates alone with whatever was coming. In Cell Block C, a metahuman who'd fought Superman during Year 2 heard the alarms and knew exactly what they meant. The regime was losing. Not to the insurgency, not to external threat. To something that made their entire power structure meaningless. The cell doors were still locked. Still secure. Still backed by redundant systems that should have held against anything. Prime walked past them. He wasn't opening cells. Wasn't targeting locks. He was just moving forward trajectory set on whatever lay deeper in the facility, and the infrastructure was failing around him like a ship taking water. The power grid stuttered. Backup generators kicked in, failed, kicked in again. The pressure-sensitive floors registered weight that violated their calibration parameters and shut down rather than process the impossible data. Quantum encryption tried to maintain coherence and collapsed into static. Cell doors throughout the facility unlocked simultaneously. Not because Prime triggered them, because the systems governing them had lost the ability to enforce locked versus unlocked. 347 inmates looked at open doors and made the only rational choice. They ran. The exodus was immediate and chaotic. Political prisoners who'd maintained dignity through years of isolation pushed past supervillains who'd spent the same time plotting revenge. No one stopped to fight. No one tried to settle scores. The only priority was distance from whatever had made the trench meaningless. They flooded toward the exits in waves, a human tide of rage and desperation and relief that the cage was finally open. Guards who'd stayed to oversee evacuation found themselves overrun barriers that should have channeled the flow, simply absent from a facility that had forgotten how to be a prison. Flash was on site within 40 seconds of the first breach alarm, called in from Metropolis Containment Detail. He hit the scene at just above sound barrier, ready to intercept escapees, to run interference, to do what he'd been doing for the regime since the day he decided survival meant cooperation. The sight stopped him cold. Inmates were everywhere. Pouring from the facility's primary exits, from emergency hatches, from structural failures that had opened new passages to the surface. The scale wasn't breach. It was hemorrhage. The trench was emptying itself, while its automated systems flickered and died. He could catch them. Could run the perimeter, subdue the dangerous ones, corral the rest. He'd done it before. He'd run circles around entire riot formations. But he was watching the trench's monitoring station, spark and fail, watching security measures that had held for 5 years shut down in sequence, and he understood with absolute clarity that this wasn't something speed could solve. His comlink crackled, Superman's voice tight with controlled fury. "Report. Full breach. Inmates escaping. I can intercept, but then intercept. Sir, this isn't a standard break. The facility itself is failing. Someone walked through every layer we had." Silence on the line. Then, "Contain what you can. Lethal force authorized for high-priority targets. I'm deploying yellow lanterns for aerial sweep." "That's not going to..." The connection cut. Flash looked at the chaos, at the hundreds of people who'd been buried alive by the regime's need for control, now free, because something had made control irrelevant. He could run. Could work until muscles screamed and joints ground bone on bone. Could maybe recapture 40% before they scattered too far. But the trench was still collapsing. Still emptying. And somewhere inside, the thing that had done this was still walking. He ran anyway, because running was what he did. Because the alternative was standing still while the world fell apart. Batman watched through satellite feeds from 3 different angles, each showing the same dissolution of order. The trench had been bedrock, the symbol that the regime could bury anything. Now it was a wound in the earth, bleeding prisoners into a city that had just watched its Superman defeated on camera. His fingers moved across the keyboard, routing messages to insurgency cells. They needed to be ready. not to exploit this to protect civilians from what came next. The regime would react with overwhelming force, would hunt down escapees with prejudice that made previous purges look restrained, would prove they still controlled something by making examples. The message stream paused as a new feed came online. Interior cameras, the ones that should have died with the power grid, somehow still functioning, showing corridor after corridor of empty cells, damaged infrastructure, and at the center of it all, Prime walking deeper, not toward the surface, not following the fleeing inmates. He was moving toward the lowest levels, the ones that held things even the regime didn't want to acknowledge. Political prisoners so dangerous, their names had been erased. Experiments that had failed but couldn't be disposed of. Evidence of crimes the New Order wanted buried. Batman's hand hovered over the keyboard. He should warn someone. Should alert whatever command structure still functioned. Should at least try to intercept before Prime reached materials that could make this situation worse. But he'd watched every intervention fail. Watched every attempt at control collapse. The math was clear. He closed the feed and focused on civilian evacuation coordinates instead. In the ruins of the trench, Prime reached the final door. The one that led to record archives, to the classified materials the regime had decided were too damaging to destroy, but too dangerous to acknowledge. He paused there, hand against the reinforced barrier, and for the first time since arrival, showed something approaching interest. Then he kept walking. The door opened because the concept of locked had stopped meaning anything in his proximity. What Prime saw in those archives, he didn't share, didn't broadcast, didn't weaponize for propaganda. He simply looked confirmed something and turned back toward the surface. Behind him, the trench's lowest level began collapsing structural integrity, failing now that the supports had lost coherence. The archives would be buried under tons of rubble and seawater secrets taking themselves out, rather than face whatever judgment Prime represented. He emerged from the facility's main entrance to find the plaza ringed with yellow lantern constructs, aerial drones and Flash vibrating with barely contained frustration at the perimeter. They looked at him, at the armor still unmarked, at the expression that suggested he'd been mildly inconvenienced by obstacles that should have been absolute. "Stand down," Flash said, though his voice carried no conviction. By authority of... Prime walked past him. Not through. Just past because Flash wasn't blocking his path, and they both knew it. The yellow lanterns raised weapons. Prepared to engage. Waited for authorization that hung in digital silence, while Command debated whether throwing more resources at this threat would accomplish anything except proving their impotence again. Prime reached the perimeter, stepped over the containment line, and kept going. South. Always south. Following some trajectory, only he understood, leaving chaos and structural failure in his wake like weather patterns following a storm. Behind him, the trench groaned and settled, one wing collapsing entirely as the foundation gave up trying to support weight it was never meant to hold. Inmates were scattering across 3 counties. The regime's ultimate symbol of control was now a scar on the landscape, smoking and broken. Flash stood in the ruins and understood what Batman had already calculated. This wasn't a fight. Wasn't an invasion. Wasn't even an attack in any meaningful sense. This was an audit. And they were failing. Okay, so honestly, Chapter 4 is petty on a god-tier level, and I love it. Prime doesn't even attack the regime's darkest prison. He shows up and the place just folds, like it's not being destroyed. Reality just goes, nah. I don't know what to do with this guy, and shuts down. Man walks through solid rock the way you walk through bad Wi-Fi. Well, Flash is out there losing his mind, sprinting around trying to wrangle hundreds of inmates, and Prime's just strolling through classified files like he's at a library, flipping pages, thinking, yeah, okay, this timeline is cooked. And that underwater prison, years of planning, funding, intimidation, fear, well, Prime turns it into a punchline in like 5 minutes. He's not even there to break people out. The walls just give up out of embarrassment as he passes. Now you see the wildest part is him walking past Flash and the Lanterns like they're literal NPCs. And Batman calling it an audit is perfect, because that's exactly what it is. Prime isn't fighting anyone. He's literally fact-checking their entire power structure and exposing it as fake. The deployment order came through at 1523 hours classification level, reserved for planetary threats, Yellow Lantern Corps' mobilization. Full complement with authorization to employ lethal measures without civilian oversight. Hal Jordan received the directive while patrolling the Asian theater, redirected mid-flight with coordinates locking him toward Metropolis airspace. He knew what it meant. The regime was escalating past conventional assets, past meta-human teams, past everything that operated within Earth's power curve. They were calling in forces designed to police sectors, to suppress revolutions across star systems, to make entire civilizations comply through concentrated will and manufactured terror. For one man in armor walking south, Hal reached the rendezvous point 7 minutes ahead of schedule. 36 Yellow Lanterns were already in formation, rings-charged fear constructs manifesting as geometric precision around the target zone. More were arriving by the second, pulling in from continental assignments, from orbital patrols, from missions that had been deemed critical until this moment redefined the word. The target was visible from 5,000 meters. A single figure moving through the outskirts of what had been Metropolis's industrial sector, pace, steady trajectory, unwavering. He wasn't running, wasn't attempting evasion. Just walking like the gathering army above him was weather he'd already decided to ignore. Ground teams report all conventional measures exhausted, the tactical coordinator said through the core frequency. Entity has demonstrated immunity to kinetic force energy weapons, dimensional displacement. Recommended approach, multi-layer enclosure using fear-based willpower suppression. Hal studied the target through his ring's analytical overlay. The readings made no sense. Power signature registering as Kryptonian, but output spiking beyond any recorded baseline. The armor was absorbing and redistributing energy in patterns that violated thermodynamic law. And underneath it all, something the ring kept flagging as error, a fundamental incompatibility between what Prime was and what the universe's rules said should be possible. "Form up," Hal said. "Layered shell protocol. We build the cage from inside out compress until movement becomes impossible." The Lanterns moved with practiced coordination. This wasn't their first planetary suppression. Wasn't their first time containing something that thought rules didn't apply. The first layer manifested as a sphere 200 meters in diameter, construct material dense enough to survive stellar core pressure. Prime was at the center, still walking still, unbothered. Second layer formed inside the first. Then third, then fourth. Each one tightening the space, reducing Prime's operational volume, channeling fear into the construct matrix, until the air itself became solid with compressed terror. Prime stopped walking. For exactly 2 seconds he stood still, looking up at the layered shells of yellow light closing around him like a malignant flower. Then he raised one hand and pushed. The innermost layer cracked. Not shattered, cracked like glass under pressure. It was never designed to hold. The fractures spread in branching patterns, geometric precision dissolving into chaos as the construct tried to maintain coherence against force that simply declined to be contained. Hal poured more power into the matrix. Around him, 36 rings blazed brighter, feeding fear energy into reinforcement protocols. The second layer thickened. The third became opaque. They were generating enough compressed willpower to cage a sun. Prime pushed again. This time the constructs didn't crack. They bent. Warped inward, then outward, then sideways through dimensions that shouldn't have been accessible. The yellow light started showing colors it wasn't supposed to have: violet edges, ultraviolet bleeding into frequencies that made retinas ache. "He's not fighting the construct, someone said over the comm. He's making them irrelevant. Prime's fist drove upward through all 4 layers simultaneously. The impact point became a column of non-space, a wound in reality, where construct material tried to exist and failed. The shells peeled back yellow light, fragmenting into geometric shards that drifted like snow before dissolving entirely. 37 lanterns hovered in formation around empty air in the realization that their most powerful tactic had lasted 14 seconds. Prime looked up at them, made eye contact with Hal Jordan specifically across 300 meters of space that suddenly felt like inches. Fear doesn't work on someone who's already seen everything break, Prime said. His voice carried without amplification, cutting through wind and distance like neither existed. And will doesn't matter to someone who's already decided. He jumped, not flew. Jumped using leg strength that treated gravity as a polite suggestion. The acceleration was instant, brutal, closing the distance to the lantern formation before threat assessment could complete. He grabbed the nearest yellow lantern by the ring hand, twisted, and threw her toward the industrial sector below. Not violently, just with enough force that her trajectory removed her from the engagement. The formation scattered, spreading into combat dispersal as training took over. Constructs manifested as weapons nets, cages, every proven technique for aerial capture and suppression. Prime moved through them like they were stage props, each touch causing construct material to destabilize and fail. Hal formed a fear hammer the size of a city bus, swung it with enough force to crater mountains. Prime caught it one-handed. The construct held for almost a second before the yellow light started flickering the fear energy, unable to maintain coherence against someone who registered fear as just another failed system. You're trying to scare something that breaks universes for being wrong, Prime said. He crushed the hammer light, fragmenting between his fingers. Your ring is powered by emotion. I'm powered by being right. He released the destroyed construct and drove his fist into Hal's sternum. The blow sent him tumbling backward through the sky ring, automatically forming protective barriers that slowed the momentum enough to prevent lethal deceleration. By the time Hal stabilized, 3 more lanterns were down, their rings flickering as power reserves drained, trying to generate constructs that wouldn't fail on contact. The tactical coordinator was screaming updates, trying to coordinate a response to threat patterns that didn't match any training scenario. Yellow lanterns regrouped, formed a firing line, and unleashed concentrated beams of fear energy that could have sterilized continents. Prime walked toward them through the barrage. The beams struck his armor and scattered, redirected into harmless angles by whatever physics he operated under. He reached the formation and moved through it like a swimmer through water. Each lantern he touched, experiencing the same thing. Their rings suddenly unable to maintain charge. Their constructs wavering their connection to the emotional spectrum, disrupted by proximity to something it couldn't categorize. It wasn't brutality, wasn't excessive force. Prime wasn't trying to hurt them. He was just continuing his trajectory, and they were in the way, and the tools they'd brought to stop him were revealing themselves as inadequate. Hal tried one more time. Channeled every reserve his ring possessed, formed a construct cage using geometric patterns from Owen Archives mathematics designed to bind reality itself. The cage manifested around Prime in intricate perfection, each angle calculated to distribute force across dimensional constants. Prime looked at it with something approaching disappointment. Then he stepped sideways, not through the cage. Sideways. Into a direction that the 3-dimensional space the cage occupied simply didn't account for. He emerged outside the construct, which collapsed immediately from having its geometric foundation violated. You're using tools from inside the framework, Prime said. He wasn't gloating, just stating fact. I'm the thing that breaks framework. He descended toward Metropolis, ignoring the lanterns who were regrouping for another attempt that everyone could already see would fail. The rings were flickering across the entire formation, now power reserves depleting faster than recharge could compensate. Not because Prime was draining them, because maintaining constructs near him required fighting reality itself, and that battle consumed energy exponentially. Hal Jordan floated in the sky above a city he'd helped enslave in the name of order. Watching a threat his ring couldn't classify walk away from the core like they were irrelevant. His ring was at 47% charge and dropping. Around him, lanterns were receiving retreat orders, pulling back to recharge and reassess. The retreat order felt like surrender. Felt like the regime admitting that cosmic power, the power that had helped Superman enforce planetary compliance, wasn't enough. In the Hall of Justice Command Center, Superman watched the engagement feed cut to static as another monitoring drone went offline. Wonder Woman stood beside him, shield held tight, jaw set in the expression she wore when violence wasn't solving problems fast enough. "The Lantern Corps failed," she said. "Not a question. They're regrouping. They're retreating. There's a difference." Superman's hands gripped the tactical table hard enough that stress fractures appeared in the polymer surface. "Then we deploy everything. Every asset, every weapon. We throw the entire regime at him until something works. And when that fails," the question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications neither wanted to voice. Superman turned away from the monitors, away from the evidence that his carefully constructed order was crumbling against something that simply refused to acknowledge its authority. "It won't fail. I won't allow it." In the Batcave, watching through different feeds, Batman was already calculating evacuation logistics for when Superman's denial finally broke. The lanterns had been the last external force the regime could call on. After this, it was just Superman's personal power against Prime's. And that confrontation would end one of two ways, with Prime walking through Superman again, or with Superman escalating to measures that would destroy what remained of the city, trying to stop something unstoppable. Batman's fingers moved across the keyboard, sending new instructions to insurgency cells. Civilian evacuation, priority, Alpha. Medical supplies stockpiled. Safe routes mapped through infrastructure that might survive what came next. He was done trying to contain Prime. Done trying to broker peace with Superman. The equation had simplified to brutal clarity. Protect who you can evacuate, who you can't, and let the two forces destroy each other while minimizing collateral. The math said Metropolis was already lost. The only question was how many people he could save before the city became a crater. Above the city, Hal Jordan's ring finally gave the reading he'd been dreading. Analysis complete. Threat assessment entity operates outside measurable power scale. Recommended action retreat and establish quarantine perimeter. His ring designed to police sectors, to suppress planetary revolutions, to enforce order across light years of space, was telling him to run. He looked down at Prime's trajectory, still locked on Metropolis's heart, still unwavering. And for the first time since putting on the yellow ring, Hal Jordan felt something his power was supposed to generate in others. He felt afraid. Okay, so I honestly think Chapter 5 is just painful for the Yellow Lanterns to watch. I think Hal really believed bringing the whole squad would work. I bet he thought numbers plus fear rings would be enough. Instead, Prime treats them like random stuff in the way while he keeps walking. Well, they try the layered fear thing, and I think calling it anything fancy is lying. It's just a box. Prime opens it like something he didn't order and keeps moving like nothing happened. I honestly think fear just doesn't work on Prime. You can't scare a guy who thinks your whole universe is bad fan fiction. He's not scared of pain or dying, he's just annoyed. Then Hal pulls out the big fear hammer max confidence, and Prime crushes it and says he's powered by being right. I think that's the most disrespectful line in the whole thing. That's not even fighting, that's mental damage. Okay, so Hal tries to be smart with the shape cage, all math and angles, and Prime just steps sideways out of space. I think that's when you realize he's not playing their game at all. And I bet the funniest part is the ring scan. The ring checks Prime and straight up tells Hal to run. When your own weapon says, leave, it's over. By the end, Hal actually feels fear and I honestly think that says everything. Prime didn't just beat them, he broke their whole thing just by walking past. The broadcast went live at 600 hours across every functional network the regime controlled. Superman stood before a backdrop of the Hall of Justice uniform, pristine cape, arranged for maximum symbolic weight. The camera framing was deliberate elevated angle soft lighting, designed to project authority and calm. "Citizens of Earth," he began, voice carrying that familiar resonance of absolute certainty. "Recent events have introduced an unauthorized element into our reality. This entity will be contained. Order will be maintained. Your safety remains our highest priority." The words were precise, vetted by committee, tested against focus groups that no longer existed because focus groups implied the regime cared about consent. What mattered was the message, the projection, the reminder that Superman was still in control, even when footage from 3 continents said otherwise. The feed glitched for 2 frames. Superman's image doubled, overlapping itself. For just a moment, viewers saw 2 versions occupying the same space, the confident speaker and something underneath, something strained. Then the feed corrected, stabilized, continued as if nothing had happened. But in living rooms across the globe, people had seen it. The flicker, the crack in the facade. In the Hall of Justice Media Control Room, technicians were running diagnostics on equipment that had never malfunctioned before. The broadcast was hardened against interference, routed through 7 redundant systems monitored by AIs designed to catch and correct errors in microseconds. The glitch shouldn't have been possible. Ripple effect from the dimensional punch, one technician said, pulling up error logs that made no sense. The entity's initial breach is still propagating. It's not getting worse, but it's not getting better either. Wonder Woman watched from the observation deck, arms crossed, expression unreadable. "Fix it. We're trying. But the interference pattern doesn't match anything we know how to filter. It's like..." The technician stopped, choosing words carefully. "It's like reality itself is having trouble deciding which version is real." Below, Superman continued his address, outlining the regime's comprehensive response. Increased patrols, enhanced surveillance, mandatory compliance with evacuation protocols in designated zones. He didn't mention the trench, didn't mention the lanterns pulling back, didn't acknowledge that every measure deployed so far had failed. The broadcast was scheduled for 15 minutes, enough time to convey control without dwelling on specifics that might invite questions. Superman covered the approved talking points with mechanical precision, then closed with the phrase that had become the regime's signature, "Through strength we endure." The feed cut. 3 seconds later, every screen on the network showed static. Then Prime's image captured from a surveillance drone before it died. Just standing there, armor reflecting sunlight, looking directly at the camera, with expression that suggested he'd been waiting for exactly this moment. The image held for 5 seconds. Long enough that emergency override protocols should have killed it. Long enough that viewers had time to process what they were seeing, a side-by-side comparison between the Superman who claimed control and the entity who'd walked through every attempt to enforce it. Then the feed returned to normal programming. Approved news, approved commentary, approved reality. But the damage was done. In Gotham's Eastern Quarter, Batman monitored the broadcast through 19 different feeds, watching how quickly the narrative was fraying. The regime's message said one thing. The evidence people could see with their own eyes said another. And in that gap between claim and reality, something vital was breaking. He'd spent the last 6 hours coordinating civilian displacement. Not evacuation, the regime had forbidden that word because it implied they'd lost ground. Displacement. Moving non-essential personnel to safer zones. Creating buffer space around the impact vector Prime seemed to be following. The insurgency cells were stretched beyond capacity. Too many people moving too fast through infrastructure that hadn't been designed for panic migration. But they were moving. getting clear of what Batman's projections said would become a kill zone when Superman finally accepted that control was impossible and switched to elimination. His comm crackled. Lex Luthor's voice transmitted through so many encryption layers it sounded hollow. The propaganda isn't working. I know. Superman knows too. He's ordering mass detentions. Anyone spreading unauthorized narratives about the entity. They're calling it terrorism. Batman's fingers paused on the keyboard. How many detained so far? 400 and climbing. They're using the trench facilities that are still intact. Metamorpho is back on duty despite the structural damage. 400 people imprisoned for acknowledging what everyone had seen on camera. For refusing to pretend the regime's story matched reality. For committing the crime of observation. I'm pulling back, Batman said. The words came easier than expected. No more direct action against regime assets. No more sabotage. Every resource goes to getting civilians clear. Lex was quiet for 3 seconds. That's surrender. That's triage. Prime is going to break this system. Superman is going to try stopping him by breaking it harder. Our job is to make sure there are people left when the debris settles. And if Superman wins, Batman didn't answer. The question didn't deserve one. Across Metropolis, the regime's enforcement apparatus was deploying with intensity that made previous crackdowns look gentle. Yellow lanterns patrolled every major intersection. Military checkpoints appeared on roads that had been civilian thoroughfares yesterday. Biometric scanners at every public facility, cross-referencing faces against lists of acceptable citizens. The official explanation was security, protection against the entity that threatened their way of life. But the people being detained weren't near Prime's trajectory, weren't doing anything except existing in ways that suggested they doubted the approved narrative. Fear was replacing authority as the primary mechanism of control. And fear once deployed that openly couldn't be put back in the bottle. In the command center, Superman watched the detention numbers climb and told himself it was necessary. Temporary. Just until the crisis passed, and order could be restored through consent rather than compulsion. The same logic he'd been using since Metropolis burned. Since the day he'd decided that protecting people from themselves justified anything. Diana's hand touched his shoulder. The entity's location. The tactical displays showed Prime's position 3 kilometers south of the Hall of Justice, moving at walking speed toward what analysts had identified as a nexus point, the location where Batman and Lex had opened their dimensional gateway, where the Mother Box fragment had died, trying to process what Prime was. He was going to the source, to the wound in reality that had let him in. Mobilize everything, Superman said. Every unit, every weapon. If he reaches that nexus, we hit him with everything simultaneously. And if that fails, Superman turned away from the display, jaw set in the expression that meant debate was over. It won't. I'm ending this myself. She didn't ask what ending meant. Didn't need to. The calculation in his eyes was simple. If Prime couldn't be controlled, he'd be eliminated. If elimination destroyed half of Metropolis, that was acceptable, cost measured against the alternative of admitting the regime couldn't protect its citizens. The math was brutal. But brutality was what power became when authority failed. Batman's screens showed Superman leaving the Hall of Justice trajectory locked on Prime's position. No more proxies, no more strategies. Just the direct application of force against force, winner determined by whoever broke first. He opened a channel to every insurgency cell simultaneously. Final evacuation order. Clear sectors 1 through 15. Medical stations to backup locations. If you can't move, get underground and seal the exits. The acknowledgements came back fragmented, stressed, but compliant. People were already running. Had been running since Prime arrived. The only question was whether they'd run far enough. On Metropolis's southern edge, Prime stopped walking. He'd reached the coordinates where the gateway had opened 4 days ago. where reality still showed stress fractures from being forced to accommodate something it rejected. He stood there looking at the ground, where Mother Box fragments were buried under rubble, where Speed Force energy had torn through dimensional barriers, where desperate men had tried to pull salvation from another world and gotten him instead. The regime's surveillance was watching. Superman was 3 minutes out at maximum velocity. Every weapon system in range was locking targeting solutions. Prime didn't acknowledge any of it. He knelt, put his hand against the pavement, and felt the wound in reality that was still bleeding timeline overlap. The thing that had been rippling through the world since his first punch. The crack that had let people see two versions of Superman on broadcast. The fundamental instability that made the regime's claim of control into obvious fiction. He could end this now. Could step back through the wound, let it seal behind him, leave this world to solve its own problems. But that wasn't why he'd come. He stood, looked north toward the Hall of Justice, toward the symbol of everything this world had become, toward the Superman who'd taken hope and weaponized it, toward the regime built on the ashes of trust. Somewhere overhead, Superman was approaching, coming to defend his broken kingdom, coming to prove through violence what he could no longer prove through legitimacy. Prime waited. The city held its breath, and in the silence before impact, everyone watching understood the same truth. This wasn't about who was stronger. This was about which version of reality would survive the one the regime claimed or the one Prime represented, simply by existing where he shouldn't. The propaganda war was already over. Superman had just refused to accept the outcome. Okay, so now honestly, Chapter 6 is where the regime just looks sad as hell. Like, well, they're trying to run a whole PR war against a guy who doesn't even have social media and they're still getting their ass kicked. Okay, guys, Superman goes on live TV doing this fake calm. Everything is fine, speech and reality straight up glitches behind him like some shitty video call. At that point, you can tell the whole government is held together with duct tape and prayers while Prime is just chilling. And I swear the universe is fucking with Superman on purpose. Every time he tries to act tough and in control, the timeline stutters and shows Prime just standing there, not giving a single shit. Worst timing possible. Then okay, they start arresting people just for noticing it, which really shows how insecure and scared the regime is. Like, bro, you're arresting people for having eyes. Now Batman is the only one with a brain left. He finally stops trying to outsmart Prime and switches to damage control. And well, calling it triage is just a nice way of saying, we're fucked, run while you can. The funniest part is Prime isn't even attacking anyone. Okay, so now he's just walking back to where he showed up like he's checking a receipt. And Superman is treating it like the final boss fight, when Prime is really just there to say, yeah, this timeline is trash, right? And by this point, well, the propaganda war is already over. You can't hide the truth from a guy who can punch reality in the face. Watching Superman fly off to fight him again honestly feels like watching someone try to fight a hurricane by yelling, "Stop at it." The meeting happened in Sub-Level 9, a maintenance corridor that had never appeared on official schematics. Batman arrived first, standing in darkness, broken only by emergency lighting that cast everything in shades of red. Superman materialized 30 seconds later, touching down without sound, cape settling around him like a statement of presence. They didn't shake hands, didn't acknowledge each other beyond the minimum required by tactical necessity. Batman pulled up a holographic display between them, rotating schematic of the dimensional nexus where Prime had first emerged. The gateway site, Batman said. No preamble, no context. He's been moving toward it since arrival. Every action, every trajectory, he's heading here. Superman studied the display, jaw tight. We establish perimeter. Nothing gets through. He's walked through everything else. Then we commit more resources. You don't have more resources. Batman pulled up secondary data casualty projections, infrastructure damage assessments, refugee displacement patterns. The trench breach released 300 high-priority threats. Your lanterns are at 40% effectiveness. Metropolis has lost half its emergency services. You're hemorrhaging authority faster than you can suppress dissent. Clark's eyes flared red for a fraction of a second. Careful, or what, you'll add me to the detention lists. Batman's voice stayed flat, clinical. We're past threats. We're into mathematics now, and the math says if you keep throwing power at Prime, there won't be a city left to rule when it's over. The hologram rotated between them, showing stress fractures in space-time that had been spreading since Prime's initial reality punch. Timeline overlap signatures. Dimensional instability. The wound was still bleeding, still propagating, still making the world less stable with every passing hour. What are you proposing? Superman asked. Temporary operational alignment. Not alliance, not partnership. Just acknowledgement that we both lose if Prime reaches this point and decides to finish what he started. You think he's here to destroy the world. I think he's here to prove it's already broken. And every time we try to stop him, we give him more evidence. Superman turned away from the display, arms crossed. The posture was defensive, closed off. A man who'd built an empire on the certainty that he was right, facing the possibility that rightness didn't matter against force that operated outside moral framework. If I agree to this, he stopped, recalibrated. What's your proposal? Batman gestured, bringing up evacuation coordinates. Civilian displacement from sectors 1 through 20. Medical resources distributed to fallback positions. We stop trying to engage Prime directly and focus on damage mitigation. That's surrender. That's triage. And when he reaches the nexus, when he starts tearing reality apart, we just stand back and watch. Batman's fingers moved across the interface, pulling up molecular analysis of the gateway site. The dimensional breach hasn't sealed. The mother box fragments are still active at quantum level. If Prime interacts with it again, particularly with another reality punch, the instability could cascade. Could. Superman's voice carried the weight of a man searching for certainty and probability. Not will. Nothing about him operates on certainty. He exists outside our predictive models. But the nexus is the weakest point in local space-time. If he hits it hard enough, the timeline collapses, taking this reality with it, or fragments it, or merges it with whatever he represents as correct. The outcome's unclear. What's certain is that intervention escalates the situation faster than observation. Superman was quiet for 10 seconds. Processing, calculating, running scenarios where pride and power solved problems versus scenarios where they compounded them. The math was brutal, but unavoidable. If I pull back forces, the insurgency gains ground. The insurgency is running evacuation protocols. They're not fighting you. They're saving people from what's coming. Another silence. Longer this time. Clark turned back to the display, studying the fracture patterns spreading from the nexus like cracks in overstressed ice. How long? Until what? Until he reaches critical point. Until this truce becomes irrelevant, because there's nothing left to negotiate over. Batman pulled up trajectory analysis. 12 hours, maybe less. He's not accelerating, but he's also not stopping. And every hour that passes, the dimensional wound gets worse. And if we hit him together, coordinated strike, everything we have, we don't have everything anymore. And what we do have has already failed. Batman closed the evacuation display, brought up combat footage from the previous engagements. Superman on the ground in Metropolis. Lanterns retreating. Every attempt at control ending in demonstrated impotence. You've been trying to break him for 4 days. It's not working. Change approach or accept annihilation. Superman's hands clenched. The sound of knuckles tightening was audible in the corridor's silence. I built this world to be safe. You built it to be controlled. There's a difference. Don't. We're past that too. Past judgment. Past moral posturing. We're down to basic survival calculus. Batman met his eyes directly, No flinching, no compromise. I need you to stop escalating long enough for people to get clear. You need me to coordinate civilian displacement so there's something left when this is over. Neither of us trusts the other. Neither of us forgives anything. But we both want humans surviving the week. Clark looked at him with an expression caught between rage and something approaching desperation. The face of a man who'd killed to protect people, built a tyranny to save them, and was now watching everything slip beyond his ability to control. 12 hours, he said finally. I pull enforcement back to perimeter defense. No active engagement with the entity. Medical and civilian resources coordinate through your network. His voice hardened. But when this is over, we're enemies again. I know. The arrangement's temporary. 10 minutes. That's how long the cooperation lasts after Prime is handled. Assuming we're both alive to resume hostilities. Superman's jaw set. I will be. He left without another word, launching upward through the maintenance shaft, with enough force that dust fell from support beams. Batman watched him go, then returned to his console fingers, already moving to implement Phase 1 of an evacuation that should have started 3 days ago. The channel to Insurgency Command opened. He agreed. Pull back from all regime confrontation points. Focus everything on displacement. We have a window. Lex's hologram materialized, expression carefully neutral. You realize he'll turn on you the moment Prime is no longer the primary threat. Obviously. And you're accepting that risk because Prime doesn't care about our politics. Doesn't care who rules or who rebels. He's here to prove this entire world is a mistake. And if Batman and Superman are still fighting each other when he makes that demonstration final, then he's right. The hologram flickered. What happens at the Nexus? Batman pulled up the final analysis timeline, fracture predictions, dimensional cascade models, probability matrices that all ended in variations of catastrophic. Prime either steps through and leaves, or he decides this world needs to be corrected, deleted, overwritten with something that meets his standards. And we have no way to influence that decision. We never did. We just kept pretending intervention mattered. Lex's image dissolved, leaving Batman alone with screens full of data that confirmed what he'd known since watching Prime walk through the Batcave walls. This wasn't a fight. Wasn't a war. It was an audit they were failing in real time, and the only choice left was whether to fail quietly or fail while bringing down everything they tried to protect. He opened the final evacuation protocols. Priority Alpha. No exceptions. Everyone who could run should be running. Everyone who couldn't needed to be underground, sealed away praying they were far enough from the Nexus when whatever came next arrived. In the Hall of Justice, Superman stood before the tactical displays showing troop dispositions, enforcement assets, all the machinery of control he'd built over years, of deciding that peace required force and freedom required chains. His hand moved across the interface, pulling units back. Redirecting resources to civilian support, implementing the withdrawal Batman had demanded. Wonder Woman appeared at his shoulder. Clark, tactical adjustment, temporary. We're abandoning position. We're acknowledging reality. He didn't look at her. Couldn't. Batman's right. If we keep pushing, we destroy what we're trying to save. Pull back. Let the entity reach the Nexus. See what it does when it's not being threatened. And if it destroys everything, then we were going to lose anyway. At least this way, some people survive. She studied his profile, searching for the conviction that had sustained them through year one. Through the purges, through every decision that traded freedom for safety. What she found instead was exhaustion. The weight of maintaining absolute certainty against mounting evidence that certainty had been wrong. How long do we hold a position? Until he makes his move, or until Batman's evacuation is complete. Superman finally met her eyes. Whichever comes first. Above Metropolis, monitoring systems tracked Prime's approach. 3 kilometers from the Nexus. 2.8. 2.5. Walking at steady pace, unhurried, inevitable as weather. The city was emptying around him. Streets clearing, buildings going dark. Humanity pulling back from the impact zone, creating space for whatever came. When unstoppable force met unmovable wound in reality. Batman and Superman had agreed to stop fighting each other, but neither believed it would matter. The truce was a lie. They told themselves to feel like they still had agency, like their choices still shaped outcomes, like there was anything left to control. Prime kept walking, and reality kept bleeding. Okay, so honestly, Chapter 7 is where I think it really gets sad and funny at the same time. Like, oh gosh. Batman and Superman feel like a toxic, divorced couple who hate each other, but are forced to meet in some shitty basement because the house is on fire. I swear that's the vibe. They meet in this dark maintenance hallway and just admit, yeah, neither of us can stop the guy walking around outside. Saying it out loud makes it way worse. And honestly, I think Batman is the MVP here. He looks at Superman and basically goes, "Okay, guys, here's the truth. You're broke." Then he pulls out stats and numbers showing the entire regime army is useless. Like 0 damage, no plan, no backup. I bet that hurt Clark's ego real bad. Well, Batman starts using big words like displacement instead of just saying retreat. And I honestly think he's doing that to protect Superman's feelings. Because if he straight up said we need to surrender, I bet Superman would lose his shit and laser him out of spite. So Batman just sugarcoats it. Okay, so then they agree to this truce. And it's funny as hell because it only lasts until the threat is gone. Like 10 minutes later, they're back to beefing. That really shows they care more about fighting each other than saving the world. That's insane. Honestly, the saddest part is watching Superman realize he has to listen. His whole absolute authority thing is dead, gone. Wiped out by a teenager in solar armor. He's not in control anymore, and he knows it. So yeah, I think at the end of the day, it's just two ants shaking hands and calling it strategy, while a giant boot is already coming down. They can use smart words all they want, but let's be real, it's not a plan. It's quite a panic, actually. Do you think so? Prime reached the Nexus at dawn. The coordinates where Batman and Lex had torn open dimensional barriers 4 days ago, where the mother box had died, screaming, where reality still bled from the wound that had let him in. The pavement showed stress fractures radiating from a central point, asphalt cracked in patterns that suggested geometry from dimensions this universe didn't have names for. He stood at the epicenter and felt it. The timeline's foundation weakened beyond repair. Every ripple from his initial punch had spread through the world's structure like cracks in overstressed glass. The injustice reality was held together by momentum and denial. Now two forces that couldn't sustain coherence much longer. Batman watched from a monitoring station 3 kilometers north, screens showing biometric data that made no sense. Prime's energy signature had stabilized into something the sensors categorized as error, not increasing, not decreasing, just existing in direct violation of how matter and energy were supposed to behave. Civilian displacement at 87%. The insurgency coordinator reported. Remaining 13% are either underground or beyond evacuation radius. Batman didn't respond. 87% meant thousands were still in the impact zone. But there was no more time, no more distance. Prime had reached the destination he'd been walking toward since arrival, and whatever came next would happen whether humanity was ready or not. Superman descended from cloud cover, touching down 50 meters from Prime. No regime forces backing him, no lanterns, no strategic assets. Just him and the entity that had proven every tool of control meaningless. Prime turned to face him. No hostility in the movement, no anticipation, just acknowledgement that someone was there. "You came alone," Prime said. "Diana wanted to help. I told her no." Superman's stance was combat-ready, but not aggressive. This isn't her fight. Wasn't from the beginning. It wasn't a fight at all. Prime looked past him toward the city skyline, already showing gaps, where buildings had been evacuated and sealed. You treated it like a war, like a problem Force could solve, but I'm not here to conquer. I'm here to correct, by destroying everything, by removing what shouldn't exist. Prime's attention returned to the nexus beneath his feet. This timeline fractured at Metropolis. The Joker dies and Superman decides that justifies everything after. Every choice, every atrocity, all validated by one moment of rage. That's not how it's supposed to work. Clark's jaw tightened. You don't get to judge. I'm not judging, I'm stating fact. Prime knelt, hand pressing against the cracked pavement. Your world took the symbol and made it mean fear. Took hope and weaponized it. Took trust and buried it under surveillance and detention lists. You created a reality where Superman is the villain and called it salvation. I did what was necessary. You did what was wrong. And this universe kept going anyway, kept pretending the mistake was sustainable. Prime's fingers traced the fracture lines, following patterns only he could see. But mistakes don't get to be permanent. Not when they corrupt the foundation. Superman moved forward, heat building behind his eyes. I won't let you erase. He hit Prime with everything. Heat vision at maximum intensity, the beams cutting through air with enough power to sterilize continents. Prime's armor absorbed it, the solar feeding panels glowing brighter as they converted the attack into stored charge. Clark followed with physical force, closing the distance in a microsecond, driving his fist into Prime's chest with impact that cratered the ground and sent shockwaves rippling through underground infrastructure. Prime's head turned slightly from the force. That was all. He grabbed Superman's wrist, twisted, and threw him through the skeletal remains of a nearby building. The structure had been evacuated days ago, reinforced steel beams offering no more resistance than paper as Superman's trajectory carved a path through them. Batman's screens showed the engagement through multiple angles, thermal signatures spiking, kinetic energy readings that should have been impossible. And underneath it all, the nexus pulsing, destabilizing, responding to the proximity of forces it was never designed to contain. He's not trying to win, Batman said into the comm. He's keeping Prime distracted long enough for... He stopped. Long enough for what? There was no plan. No ace up the sleeve. Superman was fighting because it was what he did. When control failed and Batman was watching. Because bearing witness was all that remained when intervention proved meaningless. Superman rose from the rubble, blood but at his lip, uniform scorched. He'd been hurt worse, had recovered from doomsday, from Darkseid, from threats that had tested the absolute limits of Kryptonian endurance. But those fights had rules, had physics, had the comfort of knowing that effort and strategy mattered. This didn't. Prime walked toward him, pace steady, unhurried. Superman met him halfway, with another assault strength refined through years of being unchallengeable speed that had outrun apocalypse determination, that had built a regime on the ashes of democracy. Prime stopped him with one hand, held him there suspended mid-strike while Superman poured everything into movement that wouldn't complete. You're still trying to prove you're strong enough, Prime said quietly. That if you just hit hard enough, reality will bend to match your vision. But that's the mistake. Reality doesn't care how strong you are. It only cares what's true. He released Superman, didn't follow up with attack, just stood there, while Clark staggered backward. What's true? Superman's voice was raw. What's true is that I've kept this world safe, kept people alive, prevented the chaos that would have killed billions. You prevented choice, prevented growth, prevented humanity from being anything except subjects. Prime turned back toward the Nexus. And you called it peace because the alternative was admitting you'd become what you swore to stop. He knelt again, both hands flat against the fracture point. The nexus pulsed in response, dimensional barriers, thinning timeline integrity, degrading faster. Superman rushed him one final time. No strategy, no technique, just desperate application of force against something that had already demonstrated force was irrelevant. Prime didn't dodge, didn't counter. Just let the blow land, absorbed it the way he'd absorbed everything, and remained kneeling. Unmoved, unshaken. "I'm not your enemy," Prime said. "I'm your consequence." Then he punched the nexus. The impact point became a wound. Not explosive, implosive. Reality folding inward on itself as the dimensional breach that had brought Prime here was struck from within the already weakened fabric of space-time, unable to withstand force applied at its most fragile point. The timeline didn't shatter, it overlapped. Batman's screens showed it first monitoring feeds doubling, showing two versions of the same moment occupying identical coordinates. Metropolis as it was now evacuated and dying superimposed over Metropolis from year one, still burning from nuclear detonation. The images flickered, fighting for dominance, neither able to establish singular existence. Memory bled backward, forward, sideways through causality that had lost coherent direction. People watching from a safe distance suddenly recalled events that hadn't happened yet. Remembered futures that timeline overlap was making simultaneously real and impossible. The Joker's death replayed across every surface capable of holding image. Superman's fist, the laugh cutting off the moment everything changed, except now it was overlaid with versions where the choice went differently. Where Lois lived. Where Metropolis never burned. Where the timeline remained stable because the fracture point never occurred. But those versions were ghosts. Possibilities that this reality had rejected when it chose tyranny. And now they were all bleeding together. Every choice, every consequence, every moment of the last 5 years, trying to exist simultaneously in space that could only hold one coherent narrative. Superman watched his world tear itself apart and understood with brutal clarity that this wasn't destruction. This was correction. The universe rejecting a timeline that had violated its own foundation, collapsing variations that shouldn't have been allowed to persist. "You're erasing us," he said. Not accusation, statement of fact. Prime stood looking at him through air that was flickering between multiple states of existence. "I'm removing the error. What you built. What you became, the regime and everything it represented." He turned toward the horizon, where reality was fragmenting into incompatible versions of itself. The people might survive. Fragments might persist in adjacent timelines. But this, he gestured at the world coming apart. This doesn't get to continue. The nexus collapsed entirely. The dimensional wound sealed, but sealing it meant erasing everything that had come through. Every ripple Prime had caused, every change his presence had forced rewinding at fundamental level. The injustice timeline began deleting itself, not all at once, not cleanly, but inexorably like a corruption being scrubbed from damaged code. Buildings flickered and disappeared. Streets returned to pre-regime configuration. The Hall of Justice Tower symbol of Superman's authority phased through several architectural states before settling into absence the space it had occupied. Simply empty now reality, unable to remember why anything had been built there. Batman felt it in this monitoring station, felt the certainty that had sustained him through 5 years of resistance dissolving. He looked at his hands and saw them flicker. Saw two versions of himself trying to occupy the same space, the Batman who'd fought the regime and the Batman from a timeline that had never needed fighting because Superman had never fallen. The memories were incompatible, the history contradictory, and reality was choosing moment by moment which version deserved existence. Superman was on his knees now, watching his world unmake itself. Watching the regime's monuments flicker into non-existence. Watching the infrastructure of control collapse not from revolution, but from fundamental rejection by reality itself. Prime stood in the center of the collapse, untouched. The one stable point in a world losing coherence. He looked at Superman without triumph, without satisfaction, just tired recognition that correction was necessary, and that necessity was its own tragedy. "You could have been better," Prime said. "You had every tool, every advantage, every reason to build something that lasted." He turned away, walking toward the space where the dimensional wound had been. "But you chose fear, and fear doesn't get to be permanent." The last thing Superman saw before his timeline finished erasing was Prime stepping through a gap in reality that shouldn't have existed. Returning to wherever he'd come from, leaving behind a world that reality was deciding had never happened. In scattered pockets across what used to be the injustice Earth, fragments of consciousness persisted. Batman holding on to awareness through sheer refusal to dissolve. Diana confused and fragmenting, unable to reconcile the warrior she'd become with the hero she'd been before the choice at Metropolis. Hal Jordan ring-dead mind-splitting between the man who'd enforced tyranny and the man who'd never needed to. They flickered through states of existence, present, absent, remembered, forgotten, while the timeline finished collapsing around them. And then there was nothing. No regime. No insurgency. No 5 years of escalating horror justified by the death of one woman and the loss of one city. Just a universe recognizing its mistake and exercising the only power that mattered, the power to say no. Prime emerged in the space between realities, the bleed that separated one timeline from another. Behind him, the injustice world was gone. Not destroyed, corrected, removed from the list of acceptable variations. He looked at his hands. Still armored, still powered, still carrying the weight of being right when rightness required annihilation. Somewhere in the infinite multiverse, a signal pulsed. The Prime universe, detecting anomalous activity. Dimensional breach. Reality punch signature. Someone would investigate. Would find evidence that their Superboy had reached across dimensions and erased an entire timeline. They wouldn't understand. They never did. Prime turned away from where injustice had been and walked into the bleed, heading toward nowhere in particular, because everywhere was equally wrong when measured against a standard that existed only in his memory of how things should have been. He'd proven the timeline was a mistake. He'd corrected it, and he was still alone. The victory was absolute. The tragedy was that victory changed nothing. Okay. So honestly, Chapter 8 is where it all comes together, and it's kind of brutal. Guys, you really have to appreciate the poetic justice here. Superman finally shows up alone, like honestly, with no army, no speeches, no backup. And I think this is the moment he realizes all that power means nothing. Like none of it matters against a guy who's basically here to edit the script. Well, Clark still tries anyway. I honestly think he learned nothing. He fires the lasers one last time, like, okay, maybe now. Then Prime just tanks it. No reaction. Okay, so Prime starts talking to him about how he ruined everything, like an angry boss telling you that you killed the whole company. That shit hurts more than getting punched. And I think this isn't even a fight anymore. It's more like an intervention. Prime straight up tells him he's not an enemy, he's a consequence. Okay, guys, that line is cold as fuck. That's not trash talk, that's the final answer. Okay, so now the wild part. Prime punches the Nexus and the world doesn't explode. It just starts deleting itself. Like reality finally admits, yeah, this timeline is trash. No big boom, just erase. That's scary as hell, but also kind of clean. Watching Batman and Superman fade out is honestly creepy. But, well, I also think it feels right. You can't build a whole world on bad choices and expect it to last. It was always going to end like this. And yeah, the ending is sad in a quiet way. Prime fixes everything by erasing it, then just walks away alone. No win speech, no hype. I think that's the point. Being right doesn't mean you're happy. So yeah, I honestly think Injustice didn't lose a war. I bet it just got canceled. Like the universe said, fuck this. Prime clocks out and walks away without even looking back.
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel, and be sure to turn on notifications so you won't miss our future videos. Thank you for watching, and we will see you next time.